Use a calculator to perform the indicated operation. Round the result to 2 decimal places. And so here this problem is telling us that it's going to be okay to use our calculator, and I'm kind of grateful for that, especially for this fraction problem, because finding common denominators for 854 and 220 would take a lot of work. We could do it, but it would be messy. Decimals aren't so bad, but it's nice to have a chance to use our calculator for this. So let's pull up our calculator. Now we want to be sure when we're doing these problems that involve both negative numbers, like here, and also subtraction signs. Okay, so there's our subtraction. We want to be sure that we're using the right keys on our calculator. So if you remember on the calculator, here is the negative sign. This is what we're going to do when we enter a negative number. But this sign here is the sign that we're going to use. That minus, that's our subtraction sign. So that's when we're doing the operation of subtraction. So let's take a look at this first problem. So we have negative 359. And notice that I use this negative sign down here for the negative, and then we have our decimal point, 424, so that's 424 thousandths. And from that we're going to subtract. So now we're going to come over here and press the subtract, and we have 556, and then our decimal point, and then another 79 hundredths, so 0.79. And when we press enter, notice we have negative 916 and 214 thousandths, so this is 0.214. Now remember our directions. The directions said round result to 2 decimal places, and our answer has 3 decimal places, so we need to do a rounding step. So we want to go 2 decimal places. I see the 1 is 2 decimal places where we want to be looking, but remember we have to look to the digit after where we want to be rounding to, because that will tell us, do we round up or do we leave it the same? And if you remember the rounding rules, if it's 5 or higher, we would round the digit up. But this is not 5 or higher, that's just 4. So we're going to leave that second decimal place exactly the same. So our final answer will be negative 916 and 21 hundredths. So let's go ahead and write that down. So negative 916 and 21 hundredths. Now let's take a look at this other problem where we're doing fractions. So we're going to be using our fraction key here. We go ahead and clear out our last problem. So again, negative is here, subtract is here. So negative 72 over, so we press the fraction key before we go to the denominator, 854. From that I'm going to subtract. Here's my subtraction sign. And then I'm going to subtract the negative. And because my parentheses are here in my problem, I'm going to use those parentheses when I put it in my calculator as well. Negative 57, fraction key, 220, because 220 is my denominator. Since I opened parentheses, I want to be sure that I close them. So I've got a pair of parentheses there. And when I press enter, notice that we entered fractions, but our answer comes back to us in decimal form. And that's because the fractional answer for this would be too large for my calculator to hold very well. So it's just going to default to giving me a decimal approximation for whatever that fractional answer would be. So here, once again, we want to round to 2 decimal places. So I look to the third decimal place to tell me what I should do with that second decimal place. Once again, we have a 4 in the third decimal place. So that's not enough to kick the 7 up to an 8, so my final answer is just going to be 0.17, or 17 hundredths. So we'll go ahead and write that down here, 0.17. And do remember, whenever we have just a decimal portion for our answer, always a good idea to lead it out with the 0, because that helps us to see that decimal point. Otherwise, we might overlook the decimal and think that our answer is just 17. But our answer is, in fact, 17 hundredths.